Cadet Vrexenol stretched his forearms wide and laughed, a sound like grinding stones that echoed through the training facility. Around him, 20 other cadets from across the Galactic Union joined in the amusement. They had just completed their first week of training on Terra, the human homeworld, and the so-called difficulty of Earth's gravity had proven to be little more than an amusing rumor. "One standard gravity," Vrexenol announced to his companions, his exoskeleton gleaming under the facility lights. The humans speak of it with such reverence as though it were some impossible burden. His species, the Krethix, had evolved on a world with merely 0.6 standard gravities. Yet here he stood, having completed every drill with ease. Beside him, Cadet Yenna unfurled her translucent wings with a delicate flutter. The Sylphine typically existed in 0.4 gravity, her people as close to living air as biology permitted. Even she had managed the week's regimen without significant difficulty. "Perhaps we have discovered why humanity was so late to join the galactic community," she said, her voice like wind chimes. "They were too heavy to leave their own world." The other cadets chittered and hummed their agreement in a dozen different languages. They came from across the known galaxy, selected by their governments to attend the prestigious Galactic Military Academy. The 6-month rotation to Terra was meant to be the most challenging portion of their training. After only 1 week, that reputation seemed grossly exaggerated. At the front of the training hall, Instructor Min-Jun Park observed the cadets with quiet patience. The human stood perhaps average height for his species, with dark hair and an unremarkable build. Unlike the imposing Krethix or the graceful Sylphine, he possessed no obvious physical advantages. His 2 arms seemed almost comically insufficient compared to Vrexenol's 4, and his solid bone structure looked primitive next to the elegant bioengineering visible in many of the other species. "Attention, cadets!" Min-Jun called out, his voice carrying clearly despite its lack of obvious augmentation. The gathered students settled quickly, professional discipline overriding their amusement. Whatever they thought of Earth's gravity, the Academy's reputation demanded respect. Min-Jun walked along the line of cadets, his boots making soft sounds against the training mat. "You have all performed admirably this week," he began. "Your adaptation to Earth's gravitational environment has exceeded standard projections. The Academy is pleased with your progress." Vrexenol felt a swell of pride shared by his companions. Several cadets stood noticeably taller. "However," Min-Jun continued, "completing the baseline training is only the first step. True understanding of any environment comes not from controlled exercises, but from authentic experience." He paused, seeming to consider his next words. "To that end, I am inviting all of you to join me this weekend for a light trek through the nearby mountain range. It will be an opportunity for team building and to experience Terra's natural environment." "A trek?" Cadet Leon asked. The Vorsian's concern was understandable given his species' aquatic evolution, though weeks in breathing apparatus had already proven he could function in Earth's atmosphere. "Nothing strenuous," Min-Jun assured them. "A standard recreational hike that humans often undertake for relaxation. The trail is well maintained, and we will proceed at a comfortable pace. Consider it a cultural exchange as much as training." Vrexenol exchanged glances with Yenna. A recreational activity? Something humans did for relaxation in their heavy gravity? The idea was almost too perfect. It would be an opportunity to conclusively demonstrate their superiority, to show that what challenged humans was mere amusement for properly evolved species. "I accept your invitation, Instructor," Vrexenol announced formally, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. Around him, the other cadets quickly voiced their own acceptance. To decline would suggest weakness, and none of them had journeyed across the galaxy to display cowardice before a human. "Excellent," Min-Jun said, and something in his expression might have been a smile. "We depart at 0600 on Saturday. Wear your field uniforms and bring standard supplies. The trek should take approximately 3 days. 3 days. Vrexnall performed quick calculations. That suggested significant distance, perhaps 40 or 50 kilometers total. Challenging for a human, certainly, but well within the capabilities of the assembled cadets. Several of his companions could likely complete such a distance in hours rather than days. As the training session concluded and the cadets dispersed to their quarters, Vrexnall found himself walking alongside Yenna and Cadet Day Wan, a Zenthari whose species boasted impressive muscular development even in low gravity. "This trek will be enlightening," Day Wan rumbled, his massive frame seeming to absorb the hallway's light. "We will finally understand why humans required so long to develop space travel. Perhaps in their gravity, even walking is exhausting." "We should be respectful," Yenna cautioned, though amusement colored her melodic voice. "Instructor Park has been nothing but professional. It is not his fault his species evolved in such challenging conditions." Vrexnall clicked his mandibles in agreement. "Indeed, we will complete his light trek and gain appreciation for what humans overcome daily. Perhaps it will inform our future cooperation with them." "Every species has its limitations." None of them noticed Min-Jun Park standing in the corridor behind them, his human ears having caught every word. The instructor's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held a knowing quality that would have given the cadets pause had they seen it. He pulled out his communicator and sent a brief message to the mountain facility. 21 cadets confirmed for the weekend program. Standard route. They will need the full experience. The response came quickly. "Understood. The mountain is ready. Good luck, Min-Jun. Try not to break too many of them." Min-Jun smiled and pocketed the device. In his years as an instructor, he had guided dozens of groups through this particular lesson. The mountain had a way of teaching what no classroom could. Gravity, persistent and patient, was humanity's oldest instructor. This weekend, it would teach once more. Saturday morning would arrive soon enough. The cadets would learn what humans had known for millions of years, that living in one standard gravity was not a burden to be overcome, but a forge that shaped everything about who and what humanity had become. The light trek would be enlightening indeed, though perhaps not in the way the cadets currently imagined. Min-Jun made his way to his office, already composing the post-exercise report in his mind. Another group of promising young officers would complete their education this weekend. The galaxy's finest would learn to appreciate the strength that came from weakness, the endurance born from struggle, and the quiet capability of a species that had spent its entire evolution fighting against the planet that made them. Saturday morning arrived with Terra's sun painting the mountain range in shades of gold and amber. The 21 cadets assembled in the staging area, their field uniforms pristine and their supply packs properly secured. Vrexnall noted with satisfaction that every cadet appeared eager and confident. This would be a pleasant weekend, demonstrating their capabilities. Instructor Min-Jun Park arrived precisely at 0600, his own pack seeming almost carelessly thrown together compared to the cadets' meticulous preparations. He wore simple hiking boots, standard field clothing, and carried a pack that appeared lighter than Academy regulations typically required. The human's casual approach only reinforced Vrexnall's expectations of an easy journey. "Good morning, cadets," Min-Jun greeted them. "Today we will cover approximately 18 kilometers through varied terrain. The trail begins at this elevation of 800 meters and reaches 1,500 meters at our first camp. We will maintain a steady pace with scheduled breaks. Any questions?" 18 kilometers. Vrexnall suppressed his amusement. His people routinely covered such distances during morning exercise. In one standard gravity, it might take slightly longer, but nothing that would challenge properly trained military personnel. "No questions, instructor," the cadets responded in unison. Then let us begin. Min-jun turned and started up the trail at what seemed to be a relaxed walking pace. The first hour proceeded exactly as Vrexnal had anticipated. The trail wound through forested terrain, climbing gradually but never steeply. The cadets moved with easy confidence, their diverse biologies each finding advantages in the environment. Cadet Yenna drifted slightly above the ground when convenient, her sylphine physiology making even Earth's gravity seem negotiable. Day One's Zenthari strength allowed him to step over obstacles that others needed to navigate around. Vrexnal himself found his four-armed balance ideal for the uneven terrain. When the trail crossed a small stream, he simply reached across with his longer limbs, while others needed to find stepping stones. Every few minutes, one cadet or another would demonstrate some capability that seemed to make the journey trivial. Ahead of them all, Instructor Min-jun maintained his steady pace, neither hurrying nor slowing, his breathing apparently unlabored. The second hour brought slightly steeper inclines, and Vrexnal noticed the pace remained unchanged. Min-jun seemed to have found a rhythm that he intended to maintain regardless of terrain. It was still comfortable, though, and the cadets chatted among themselves as they climbed, sharing observations about Terra's surprisingly diverse ecosystem. The vegetation density is remarkable, Cadet Senna observed, her sensory stalks waving as she examined the forest. So much biological mass sustained by such heavy gravity. Everything here has adapted to the weight, Yenna noted, her musical voice thoughtful. Notice how thick the tree trunks are, how robust the root systems. Nothing on Terra can afford to be delicate. By the third hour, casual conversation had diminished slightly. The trail had become noticeably steeper, and maintaining the previous pace required more attention. Vrexnal found himself breathing harder, his respiratory system working to process oxygen in the thicker atmosphere. Around him, other cadets showed similar signs of exertion. Still, they pressed on without complaint. Military training demanded endurance, and none of them would shame themselves before their peers or their instructor. Besides, Min-jun showed no signs of distress, maintaining his steady rhythm as though he could continue indefinitely. When the instructor called for a break at the 4-hour mark, Vrexnal was grateful despite himself. The cadets settled onto rocks and fallen logs, accessing their water supplies and nutrient supplements. Several were breathing heavily, their bodies working hard to manage the sustained exertion in Earth's gravity. Min-jun drank from his own canteen, his breathing elevated but controlled. "How is everyone feeling?" he asked, his tone genuinely concerned rather than challenging. "Well, instructor," Daewon responded, though his massive frame showed a sheen of perspiration that seemed unusual. "The pace is appropriate." "Good. We have covered approximately 9 kilometers. The afternoon will continue at the same rate, with one more break before we reach camp." 9 kilometers in 4 hours. That seemed slow by any military standard. Yet Vrexnal found himself surprisingly tired. The constant pull of gravity, never ceasing, never diminishing, had a cumulative effect he had not anticipated. Every step required lifting mass that seemed to grow heavier as the day progressed. Every movement fought against that persistent downward pull. The afternoon trek proved more challenging than the morning. The trail climbed more aggressively, and the sustained exertion began revealing weaknesses in the cadets' conditioning. Species optimized for low gravity found that their usual advantages meant little when every motion required fighting against Earth's persistent embrace. Yenna, despite her earlier ease at floating above obstacles, began walking normally to conserve energy. The constant effort of negating gravity had drained her reserves faster than she had expected. Daewon's impressive musculature, developed for 0.7 gravity, now worked overtime simply to move his own mass. What should have been a demonstration of strength had become an endurance trial. Vrexnal noticed his own performance deteriorating as well, His 4 arms, usually such an advantage, now represented 4 limbs that gravity pulled at constantly. His exoskeleton, lighter than bone in his homeworld's environment, suddenly seemed unnecessarily heavy. Only Instructor Min-jun seemed unchanged, maintaining the same steady pace he had established at the journey's beginning. His breathing remained controlled, his movements efficient, showing no sign that the terrain had become more difficult. If anything, the human seemed more comfortable as the trail steepened. When they finally reached the first campsite as Terra's sun approached the horizon, every cadet was exhausted. They had covered the promised 18 kilometers, but it had been harder than any of them had anticipated. Bodies designed for lesser gravity protested the day's sustained punishment. The campsite itself was pleasant, situated in a clearing with water access and established fire pits. Under normal circumstances, the cadets would have been energized by the accomplishment, eager to share the day's experiences. Instead, they moved with the careful deliberation of those who had discovered unexpected limits. Min-jun efficiently established his own camp, then moved among the cadets, offering assistance and advice. "Make sure you eat properly tonight," he encouraged. "Your bodies are processing more energy than you realize. Hydration is critical at this elevation as well." As darkness fell and the cadets settled around their campfires, Vrexnal found himself studying their instructor with new perspective. Min-jun had completed the exact same journey, yet he moved now with easy confidence, seemingly ready to continue if needed. The human had not demonstrated superiority through any dramatic display, but rather through simple, persistent capability. "He does this for recreation," Yenna said softly beside him, her usually melodic voice subdued. "Humans do this by choice." Vrexnal clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Tomorrow would bring another 18 kilometers, and the day after would complete the trek. What had seemed like a pleasant demonstration of their abilities had transformed into something else entirely. The mountain, patient and implacable, was teaching a lesson that the training facility could not. Dawn arrived too quickly. Vrexnal's body protested movement with unusual vigor, his muscles stiff from the previous day's exertion. Around him, the other cadets showed similar signs of distress. Even Daewon, whose Zenthari physiology was renowned for rapid recovery, moved with careful deliberation as he packed his equipment. The second day's route proved immediately more demanding. The trail climbed aggressively from the start, leaving the forested lowlands behind for rockier, more exposed terrain. The air grew noticeably thinner as they ascended, each breath delivering less oxygen than the one before. Gravity remained constant, implacable, never granting even momentary relief. Instructor Min-jun set the same steady pace he had maintained since the journey's beginning. If the steeper grade affected him, he showed no sign. His breathing remained measured, his stride unchanged, as though his body had calibrated to precisely this level of exertion and would maintain it indefinitely regardless of terrain. By mid-morning, the trek had stopped resembling a recreational activity and had become a test of pure endurance. Cadets who had laughed about Earth's gravity a week earlier now fought simply to maintain forward progress. Every upward step required conscious effort. Every boulder-strewn section demanded energy reserves that were rapidly depleting. Cadet Yenna, whose sylphine grace had seemed almost mocking in the early stages, now struggled visibly. Her species' light bone structure and efficiency in low gravity had become liabilities. Each breath came shallow and quick, her respiratory system straining to extract sufficient oxygen from the thin mountain air, while her muscles worked overtime against the persistent downward pull. "Instructor," she called out during a difficult section, her voice lacking its usual melodic quality. "May we rest briefly?" Min-jun stopped immediately, his response showing no hesitation or judgment. "Of course. Everyone, 5-minute break." He found a flat section of rock and sat with easy comfort, his own breathing elevated but controlled. As the cadets collapsed gratefully onto available surfaces, Vrexenol found himself studying the human with new attention. Something fundamental distinguished Min Jun's relationship with gravity from their own. Where the cadets fought against Earth's pull, treating it as an enemy to be overcome, the instructor seemed to have reached some kind of accommodation with it. "Instructor Park," Vrexenol ventured once his breathing had steadied, "how do you maintain such consistency? The pace never changes regardless of terrain." Min Jun considered the question thoughtfully. "I suppose it is because I am not fighting the mountain," he said. "Gravity is not an opponent to be defeated. It simply is. Resistance creates exhaustion. Acceptance creates endurance." The words seemed almost philosophical, yet they carried practical weight. Vrexenol noticed how the human moved, how each step worked with rather than against the terrain. Min Jun placed his feet carefully, using the mountain's angles to assist his progress. He breathed in rhythm with his stride, maintaining efficiency rather than forcing speed. Every aspect of his movement suggested deep familiarity with the environment. The afternoon brought them above the tree line entirely. The trail became more exposed, winding across rocky slopes where wind pushed against them with persistent force. Here, the combined challenges of thin air, unrelenting gravity, and physical exposure created conditions that tested the limits of their training. Cadet Daewon, whose strength had seemed unlimited in the Academy's controlled environment, now moved with visible difficulty. His powerful muscles, developed for different conditions, consumed oxygen at rates his cardiovascular system could not sustain. What should have been his greatest advantage had become a burden, each powerful stride depleting reserves faster than they could be replenished. Yet Min Jun continued his steady advance, his human physiology showing an unexpected optimization for these exact conditions. His breathing had deepened but remained rhythmic. His pace had not slowed despite hours of continuous exertion. The human body, shaped by millions of years of evolution in one standard gravity, seemed designed precisely for this kind of sustained, grinding endurance. When they reached the second camp in late afternoon, the transformation in the cadets was complete. No one spoke of human weakness anymore. No one joked about Earth's heavy gravity. They had discovered through direct experience what abstract knowledge could never teach, that living in constant gravity created a different kind of strength. The camp sat at 1,700 meters elevation, higher than many species maintained their urban centers. The thin air and persistent cold added environmental challenges to the physical demands. As the cadets established their camps with noticeably less efficiency than the previous night, Min Jun moved among them, offering assistance. "You are all performing admirably," he said, his encouragement genuine rather than patronizing. "Many species struggle far more with their first serious mountain trek. Your training is evident in your persistence." Vrexenol appreciated the kind words, yet they carried an implicit message. This was not unusual difficulty for humans. This was normal. Earth's children had evolved managing these conditions as standard existence, not as special challenges requiring exceptional effort. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, the cadets gathered closer to their heating units. At this elevation, Terra's environment became actively hostile without technological assistance. The thin atmosphere provided little insulation, and the night cold penetrated even their advanced equipment. Min Jun sat slightly apart, seemingly comfortable despite the conditions. He had activated only minimal heating, relying primarily on his own physiology and proper layering of clothing. The human's comfort in an environment that the cadets found borderline intolerable spoke to fundamental differences in adaptation. "Tomorrow is the final day," Cadet Senna said softly, her sensory stalks drooping with exhaustion. "The summit push, then descent back to the staging area." "Can we actually complete it?" Yenna asked, voicing the doubt that others felt but had not expressed. I am not certain my body can sustain another day like this. Vrexnal looked around at his companions. Every species represented here was considered elite by their respective governments. They had been selected from millions of candidates, trained to peak performance, prepared to serve as officers in the Galactic Union's military. Yet a simple recreational hike on Terra had pushed them to their limits. "We will complete it," Day One rumbled with determination. "To turn back now would dishonor not just ourselves, but our entire species." The massive Zenthari was right, of course. Failure was not an acceptable option. Yet Vrexnal could not help but consider the implications of their struggle. If this light trek represented standard human recreation, what did that suggest about humanity's military capabilities? About their potential in sustained operations? About the endurance that had allowed them to spread across their planet despite lacking obvious physical advantages? Across the camp, Instructor Min Jun prepared his simple evening meal, his movements efficient and practiced. The human seemed in his element here, more comfortable on this cold mountain than he had been in the climate-controlled training facility. It was as though gravity, altitude, and environmental stress were not obstacles for him, but rather the natural conditions in which his species thrived. Tomorrow would bring the final test. The summit push would be the hardest section yet, then a descent that would challenge muscles in entirely different ways. The cadets would complete the trek because their honor demanded it. But Vrexnal suspected that when they returned to the academy, everything they believed about humans and their supposed physical limitations would be forever changed. The third morning arrived with thin clouds obscuring the summit above. The temperature had dropped below freezing during the night, and ice crystals decorated every exposed surface. Vrexnal's body had stiffened considerably, his exoskeleton creaking as he forced movement through protesting joints. Around him, the other cadets showed similar deterioration, their accumulated fatigue now a significant factor in their performance. Yet they assembled as ordered, professional discipline overriding physical discomfort. No one suggested abandoning the trek. No one requested easier conditions. They were military personnel, and they would complete their mission even if it meant pushing beyond what they had believed were their limits. Instructor Min Jun addressed them before departure. Today's route is approximately 15 kilometers, but with significant elevation gain. We will reach the summit at 2,000 meters, then descend back to the staging area. This will be the most challenging section. He paused, studying their faces. However, I want to share something with you before we begin. The cadets listened attentively, grateful for any insight that might help them through the coming ordeal. In the galactic military, Min Jun continued, humans are often considered physically inferior. We lack the strength of Zenthari, the grace of Sylphine, the versatility of Crethix. By most measurable standards, we are the weakest species in the academy. He let that statement settle. And in low gravity, that assessment is absolutely correct. Place me in 0.5 standard gravities, and I become clumsy and inefficient. Many of you would easily outperform me. Vrexnal clicked his mandibles in surprise. The admission was unexpected, particularly from an instructor. But, Min Jun continued, we are on Terra, in one standard gravity, and here the equation changes completely. Not because humans are stronger, but because we are optimized for different conditions. Every species has environments where they excel. This is ours. He gestured toward the mountain above them. This light trek is something millions of humans do annually for enjoyment. Children complete routes like this. Elderly humans maintain hiking as recreation well into their advanced years. This is not exceptional for us. It is normal. And that normalcy comes from millions of years of evolution where leaving the trees, walking upright, and traveling long distances across varied terrain determined whether our ancestors survived. The instructor's expression became more serious. I tell you this not to diminish your accomplishment, but to provide context. You are succeeding at something genuinely difficult for your physiology. Previous cadet groups have had members unable to complete this trek. There is no shame in struggle, only in refusing to try. Whatever happens today, you have already proven your capability and determination. The words provided perspective that shifted Vrexnall's understanding. He had been measuring his performance against humans, feeling inadequate when he struggled with what Min Jun found routine. But the instructor's point was more nuanced. Every species had their optimal conditions. Humans were not superior, merely suited to their environment. The same way Vrexnall would excel in his homeworld's lower gravity, humans excelled in theirs. The summit push began immediately, and the increased elevation made itself felt within minutes. The air had become noticeably thinner, each breath providing perhaps 70% of the oxygen available at sea level. Combined with the steep grade and persistent gravity, it created conditions that tested the limits of non-human physiology. Cadet Yenna began struggling within the first hour. Her sylphine respiratory system, optimized for low-density atmospheres, could not extract sufficient oxygen from the thin mountain air. She gasped with each step, her elegant form reduced to pure survival effort. When she finally stumbled and fell, unable to continue, it was Day One who moved to help her despite his own exhaustion. "I cannot," Yenna whispered, her musical voice barely audible. "I have failed." "You have not failed," Min Jun said firmly, arriving at her side. "You have reached your physiological limit, which is different from failure. Many humans would struggle equally at this elevation without proper acclimatization." He activated his communicator. "I am calling for transport to evacuate you to lower elevation. Your health is the priority." The rescue transport arrived within 20 minutes. A small craft that could navigate the mountain terrain. As Yenna was carefully loaded aboard, Vrexnall saw relief mixed with disappointment in her expression. She had pushed to her absolute limit, but biology had defeated will. The remaining cadets continued upward, their number reduced, but their determination unshaken. Min Jun adjusted the pace slightly, allowing for the cumulative fatigue and elevation effects. His own breathing had become more labored, Vrexnall noticed, though the human still moved with practiced efficiency. "Instructor," Vrexnall called during a brief rest, "does the elevation affect you as well?" "Of course," Min Jun responded. "Altitude impacts all aerobic organisms. I have better acclimatization than you due to living at sea level on Terra, but I still feel the effects. The difference is that human physiology is optimized for operating in suboptimal conditions. We evolved as endurance specialists because our environment demanded it." The explanation clarified something Vrexnall had been observing. Min Jun was not unaffected by the trek's difficulty. He was simply better equipped to manage it. His cardiovascular system, his muscle fiber composition, his respiratory efficiency, all were the product of evolution in exactly these conditions. Humans had not conquered gravity. They had adapted to it so thoroughly that it became their advantage. As they approached the summit, the trail became a series of switchbacks across exposed rock face. Wind buffeted them constantly, and every step required careful placement to avoid slipping on loose stone. Here, the mountain revealed its final lesson, that persistence mattered more than strength. That careful consistency outperformed spectacular bursts of ability. Cadet Senna fell behind, her sensory stalks drooping with exhaustion. Day One, despite his own fatigue, dropped back to assist her. Cadet Leon, struggling with his breathing apparatus at elevation, found help from two companions who adjusted their pace to match his capabilities. The cadets had stopped competing and had begun cooperating, each supporting the others through their individual challenges. It was, Vrexnall realized, another lesson the mountain taught. Individual capability mattered less than collective determination. The strongest could support the weakest, and together they could accomplish what none might manage alone. When they finally reached the summit at midday, the 20 remaining cadets gathered in exhausted triumph. Below them, Terra spread in magnificent complexity, forests giving way to plains in the distance, weather patterns visible as they formed and moved. The view was breathtaking, not just for its beauty, but for what it represented. They had climbed through one standard gravity to stand at this elevation. "Congratulations," Minjun said simply. "You have completed what many believed impossible. Remember this moment. Remember that your limitations are often less restrictive than you imagine. Remember that different does not mean inferior, only optimized for different conditions." The descent would still challenge them, using different muscles and requiring different skills. But Vrexnall knew that the hardest part was complete. They had learned what the mountain had to teach, lessons that no classroom could provide about endurance, adaptation, and the hidden strengths that emerged from apparent weakness. The return to the Galactic Military Academy felt different from their departure 3 days earlier. The transport carried 20 exhausted but fundamentally changed cadets, their uniforms showing the wear of hard use, their bodies bearing the honest fatigue of genuine accomplishment. Cadet Yenna had rejoined them at base camp after medical clearance, her disappointment at not completing the summit tempered by understanding that she had pushed to her physiological limits. Vrexnall stood at the transport window, watching Terra's landscape pass below. The mountains they had traversed seemed smaller from this altitude, yet he knew intimately now how deceptive that appearance was. Those peaks had taught lessons that no amount of classroom instruction could convey. He understood now why the Earth rotation was considered essential to officer training, despite humanity's relatively recent admission to the Galactic Union. When they disembarked at the Academy, word of their trek had already spread. Other cadets gathered to hear accounts of the experience, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Vrexnall found himself surrounded by questions from his cohort, cadets who had declined the invitation and now wondered if they had made an error. "Was it truly as difficult as you appear?" asked Cadet Vren, a Crethix from Vrexnall's home colony. "You seem quite fatigued for what was described as a recreational activity." Vrexnall clicked his mandibles thoughtfully before responding. "It was more challenging than any training exercise we have completed here. Not because the distance was exceptional, or because the terrain was impossibly difficult, but because it was sustained. Hour after hour, gravity never ceased pulling at us. The thin atmosphere never provided quite enough oxygen. Every step required fighting conditions that humans consider normal." "But you completed it," Vren said. "Surely that demonstrates our superiority over these conditions." "No," Vrexnall replied, surprising himself with the firmness of his response. "It demonstrates that with determination, we can operate in environments not optimized for our physiology. But humans live in those conditions constantly. What exhausts us in 3 days is what they experience every moment of their existence. We visit their world and struggle. They inhabit it effortlessly." The distinction seemed to resonate with his listeners. Around the group, Vrexnall saw understanding begin to replace the casual dismissiveness that had characterized earlier attitudes toward humanity. Over the following days, the experience continued shaping perspectives throughout the cadet corps. Training exercises suddenly revealed patterns that had been invisible before. When human cadets performed endurance drills, their consistent pacing and refusal to quit took on new meaning. What had seemed like stubbornness or inability to recognize defeat now appeared as strategic asset allocation, a species-wide understanding that persistence often outperformed intensity. In the Academy's strategic planning courses, instructors began incorporating new scenarios that leveraged species-specific advantages: Zenthari's strength for rapid assault operations, Sylphine grace for delicate extraction missions, Crethix versatility for adaptive infiltration, and humans, increasingly, for sustained operations in challenging gravitational or atmospheric conditions. "We are restructuring our understanding of force composition," Admiral Kethral announced during a General Assembly 2 weeks after the trek. The Zenthari commander's massive frame dominated the stage as he addressed the assembled cadets. Historical doctrine treated all species as largely interchangeable, with minor adjustments for environmental preferences. Recent field exercises have demonstrated the fallacy of this approach. The Admiral gestured to a holographic display showing various operational environments. Each species represents not a general resource, but a specialized capability. Humans excel in sustained surface operations under significant gravity. Sylphine provide unmatched speed in low-density atmospheres. Krethics adapt rapidly to variable conditions. Effective military doctrine requires deploying each species where they possess inherent advantages. Vrexnall listened with interest. The Admiral's words reflected the lesson the Mountain had taught, but applied to broader strategic thinking. The Galactic Union's military had historically attempted to train all species to identical standards, erasing differences in pursuit of uniformity. The new approach recognized that diversity provided strength, that optimal deployment meant matching species to appropriate conditions. In the weeks that followed, Instructor Min-Jun Park's training rotations became significantly more popular. Cadets who had previously dismissed the Earth segment now sought it out, recognizing that understanding human capabilities required direct experience with their environmental conditions. The waiting list for the weekend mountain trek grew to months long, despite knowledge of its difficulty. Vrexnall found himself mentoring newer cadets preparing for the experience, sharing insights about pacing, hydration, and mental preparation. "Do not attempt to match human performance," he advised. "Instead, focus on discovering your own limits and pushing slightly beyond them. The Mountain teaches not that humans are superior, but that every species has environments where they excel." 3 months after the trek, Vrexnall received notification of his first assignment after graduation. The posting detailed a long-term garrison position on a newly integrated world with 1.1 standard gravities. The assignment, which would have seemed burdensome before his Earth rotation, now felt manageable. He had trained in 1 standard gravity and had learned to operate effectively despite the constant challenge. The additional 0.1 would be noticeable but not debilitating. Attached to his orders was a note from Instructor Park. "Cadet Vrexnall, your performance during the mountain exercise demonstrated the adaptability and determination that will serve you well in this assignment. Remember that difficulty is often the forge that shapes capability. Your species evolved for different conditions, but you have proven that evolution is not destiny. Environments can be adapted to, limitations can be overcome, and cooperation can bridge differences. Congratulations on your graduation and your posting." Reading the note, Vrexnall felt a complex mixture of pride and humility. He had arrived on Terra believing he understood military capability, confident in his advantages, certain that humans represented an inferior addition to the Galactic Union's forces. The Mountain had taught him otherwise, not through any dramatic revelation, but through simple, persistent truth. The final graduation ceremony brought together cadets from across the known galaxy, a collection of species so diverse that establishing any universal standard seemed impossible. Yet they stood together in disciplined ranks, united by shared experience and mutual respect. When the human cadets received their commissions, Vrexnall joined the applause with genuine appreciation rather than polite obligation. After the ceremony, Vrexnall found Instructor Park among the crowds of celebrating graduates and families. "Instructor," he said formally, "I wanted to thank you for the mountain trek. It changed my understanding of capability and limitation." Min-Jun smiled, the expression warm and genuine. "The mountain did the teaching, cadet. I simply provided the invitation. Every species brings unique strengths to the Union. Your journey was learning that difference is not deficiency, merely optimization for alternate conditions." "Still," Vrexnall insisted, Without that experience, I would not have developed the perspective necessary for effective service. Many humans I have met possess that quality, that ability to persist regardless of conditions. Is it truly just adaptation to gravity? The instructor considered the question thoughtfully. Gravity shaped us, he said finally. Millions of years of evolution in one standard gravity, where every movement required fighting against persistent downward force, where endurance mattered more than speed, where consistency outperformed brilliance. But perhaps more importantly, we learned that our environment was not an enemy to be conquered, but a reality to be accepted and adapted to. That lesson extends beyond physical conditions to mental and emotional challenges as well. As Vrexnal departed Terra for his new assignment, he looked back at the planet that had reshaped his understanding. The mountains still stood patient and implacable, ready to teach new students the lessons they had taught for millions of years. Gravity still pulled at everything with constant, unrelenting force. But now Vrexnal understood that force differently, not as a burden to be overcome, but as a constant teacher, shaping those who lived within its influence into specialists of endurance, patience, and persistent capability. Humanity's children, forged in gravity's embrace, had learned lessons that no other species could fully understand without direct experience. And in that difference lay not weakness, but unexpected strength.